Hey everybody, I'm Erica Freudenberger, the Outreach Engagement and Marketing Consultant at the Southern Adirondack Library System. And I'm super excited today to be working with everybody on the next step of your community-based strategic plan. As you can see, we are in the final stage of putting together your community-based strategic plan. We've covered a lot of ground, so please give yourself a huge round of applause for making it this far. We began with an overview of the strategic planning process. We discussed why we plan, putting together a planning committee to help get the work done, and the difference between traditional and engaged planning. We then worked on a landscape review, looking at the types of qualitative and quantitative data that we needed to collect for our plan. We practiced some tools to help us gather qualitative data, or what we might call public knowledge. And at our last session, we discussed how to use all of this terrific qualitative and quantitative data that we've collected to learn more about our community and shape our community-based strategic plan. Today, we're going to bring all the work you've been doing together into one community-based plan of service. I'm going to do a walkthrough of what the final plan should look like so you can understand how it all comes together from the planning summary to aligning your resources. And I just want to remind everybody that I am always available to help you through this process. So if you get stuck or you have questions or you just want to talk stuff through, don't hesitate to reach out. Shoot me an email or give me a call and I'm here to help you with it. So this community-based planning process helps us align our organization with community aspirations while bringing together our board of trustees, the director, library staff, and community members to help identify where we're going to be allocating resources and putting our energy and why those things matter. It also creates a framework for accountability to ensure that we follow through on what we said we would do, which is how we build ongoing trust with our community, colleagues, and stakeholders. So before we move forward with what the final community-based plan looks like, I want to remind everybody why we do this. One, because it's a requirement of the New York State Division of Library Development to maintain your charter as a public library. Two, it creates a roadmap to the future for your organization. Three, it incorporates what matters to people's lives and their aspirations for the future. Four, it establishes how the library defines success and how it's going to ensure that it will meet its goals. And finally, it communicates to the public how the library's work benefits the entire community. At the end of the first session, your homework was to form a planning committee and to try out the SOAR exercise. The planning committee is the group working with the director to create the community-based plan. If you've made it to this recording, you should have a planning committee in place and have everybody contributing to your asset map or your community resource plan. In our second session, we discussed the landscape review process, which is the research segment of planning that incorporates both internal and external data. During this process, you gather demographic information about your community, including who lives there and whether it's growing or contracting, library statistics that reflect how your community is using the library, things like circulation, the number of visits you have each year, and program attendance. Figuring out what key stakeholders are working on, which requires reaching out to other groups in town to see what they're prioritizing as a focus for the next couple of years, and finding out what your municipality's priorities are. And again, a great way to do that is to review their comprehensive plan. In our last session, we discussed how to use some community engagement tools to collect public knowledge. We used two tools, the Ask exercise with individuals and the Aspirations exercise with groups. Talking to the public about the issues that are important to them is critical to the community-based planning process. We call this approach turning outward, and that idea of turning outward toward our community is at the core of everything we're doing. We do this to find out what matters most to people, to help us make intentional choices about the programs and services that we offer, and to ensure that what we're doing at our libraries reflects the needs and aspirations of our community. Using this approach, we can create community-based organizations that matter to people because they see we've made time to talk with and listen to people. We're no longer making decisions in a void or wondering why nobody shows up to our programs. We know what people want and we can deliver that to them. We're working with our communities to help them realize their aspirations. We figure this out by analyzing the mix of quantitative and qualitative data. Once we've collected that data, we meet with our planning committee to review everything we've learned and identify the most important themes. This is when we can think about who needs to decide the priorities and directions we're establishing and who is going to do the work to make this plan successful. Now is a great time to discuss the decision-making process, what the plan is, ask for feasibility feedback, and clarify what resources, things like time, money, and people, will be needed to make it happen. Once that's been done, we determine which things we can take action on and share what we've learned with other community stakeholders to see what they're interested in taking on and how we can support those efforts. So once we identify our top 3 strategic priorities that we're going to take action on, we choose those and develop our goals, objectives, and activities to support them. Today we get to the final stage of the planning process, pulling everything you've learned and decided into one final document, the community-based strategic plan. Usually the plan's written by the director with input and discussion from the planning committee. Once a rough draft is completed, share it with the board and the community stakeholders who participated in its development. A community-based plan has multiple parts, which might sound like a lot initially, but it usually comes together fairly quickly, so please don't be discouraged. Most of the hard work of collecting and analyzing the information about your community has already been done by the time you're writing the plan, so it's really more of a chance to distill what you've learned and show how you arrived at your conclusions. A strategic plan shouldn't be boring or something that sits on the shelf and gathers dust. It's a living document that shapes the library's services and gives guidance on how and why we do the things that we do. Everybody in your organization should be familiar with the plan and be able to talk about how what the library does reflects what you heard from the community. And I know that that sounds like a tall order, but it's why you want to spend some time thinking this through and making it, if not a compelling read, at least something exciting and reflective of what you heard from the community. So once it's completed and approved by your Board of Trustees, share the written plan on your website. You should be really proud of it because it shows how much care and thinking went into it and how the library works to benefit the community. When done right, a community-based strategic plan can be a really powerful marketing piece for the library, and it definitely informs all of the programs and services you provide. It can also establish expectations between the director, the Board of Trustees, library staff, and the public around communication and accountability. It's a really great opportunity to dream about the future together and to make it come to life. The plan begins with the title page. Make the report reflect your library. You can include a picture of your library, but it's even better if you include pictures of people, programs, and doing things and using the library. You want to make this very clearly that it's about your community. You might also want to include if your library has a logo, put that on the page, but you want to have something that's really going to capture people's interests and make them want to learn more about what's inside. In addition to a compelling visual, you want to include the library name, identify it as a library strategic plan, and have the date that your Board of Trustees approved the plan and the range of time that the plan covers. I think I mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. We used to do strategic plans that covered 5 years at a time. But given the pace of change that we're currently experiencing, that is no longer realistic. I recommend planning no more than 3 years into the future. As I mentioned before, it's a living document, so if you need to make adjustments before the end of the 3 years, do so. But be sure that whatever changes you're making are approved by the board and indicated on the revised plan when it was revised and updated. The planning summary is a brief synopsis of the entire strategic plan. This is where you can give an overview of the high points. You can share the process you used and explain how it informs the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve and how you plan to get there. You don't want to go into too much detail here. That's going to come in later down the road, but you do want to highlight the high points and get people excited about what's coming. Please be sure to recognize and thank everybody that was involved in the process, including your planning committee, the Board of Trustees, library staff, any specific stakeholders that were involved, as well as your community for giving them your time and input. This is an excellent opportunity to demonstrate that what the library does benefits the entire community. You can talk here about how your mission, strategic direction, and goals were shaped by what you heard from the community and how you are responding to that. The history and landscape review is a chance for you to put the strategic plan in context. So you want to share a brief history of your library, including any significant milestones or achievements it's had. It's a really great chance to brag about how fabulous you are and all that you've accomplished. You also want to give a little bit of an overview of the community you serve, and here's where you can plug in information from the landscape review, including some hard data like census statistics about who lives in your community and any trends that you notice, like, is your community growing? Is it shrinking? Is it aging? What's going on? And then you want to talk about how those trends that you've identified are influencing the plan that you've created. You can also provide a synopsis of the conversations you heard. And by that, I just mean like the major themes that emerged and how that informs your plan. You also want to make sure to identify any trends in the profession and talk about why responding to them makes sense for your community. And finally, you want to be able to identify any community initiatives that are taking place that the library will be supporting. So this is a chance to provide a snapshot of the library and the community's current status, and it will come in really handy down the road when you work on future plans as a point of comparison. The mission statement is where you want to explain the library's purpose and identity, who we are as an organization. Feel free to have fun with this. This is something that's going to inform all the decisions you make about the library. It doesn't have to be boring or sound like every other library's mission statement. It should be a joyful expression of why you do what you do that gets people really excited about the library. It also should be concise enough that people can refer to it and mention it when they are working. So it's something that your trustees, your staff, and yourself should be able to remember and reflect on. So the vision statement is by its very nature aspirational. It can include a bit of blue sky thinking and focus on the future of the library. It establishes the long-term direction of the library, and we want something that's going to be inspirational and gets people really excited about what it is that we're doing. In the past decade, we've seen a renewed interest in values. People now make purchasing decisions based on a company's values. What matters to us and informs the work we do isn't seen as distinct from the product we're creating. This push is something that we see a lot was sparked by millennials who are more concerned with experiences than things and expect to see their values incorporated into all they do. We've seen overdue conversations about racial and social justice in the past couple of years and ongoing concern about climate change. These issues are not separate from commerce and the work we do. People expect companies to state and live by what they say they value. And the same holds true for us in public libraries. So when we're identifying our library's values, we want to think about how they align with the community's values. Once you've done that, you may need to revisit your policies and procedures to ensure that they align with what you've identified explicitly as your values. Your programs, resources, services, and practices should reflect the values that you've identified. When people see that your values aren't something that just exists on paper, but is embodied in all that your organization does, they notice, and it tends to build loyalty as well as being the right thing to do. Community aspirations are the part of the plan where you want to share how you've arrived at your conclusions. You can provide a synopsis of how you gathered all the data included in the plan, and if you talk to people during a community celebration, share that. Mention the groups that took part in aspirations exercises and how many people you talked to. This is a great place to share the community narrative you heard during the conversations. You can plug that into the plan to show how it impacts the decisions you've made about services, collections, staffing, and programs. Strategic priorities establish the common purpose that the library is working toward, outlining its priorities in broad strokes. The strategic priorities you choose should reflect what you heard from the community while realistically reflecting what the library can accomplish. Your priorities might be lofty. You can down into the specifics when you get to your outcomes, goals, and objectives, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Strategic priorities are a chance for us to articulate and synthesize everything we heard and thought about while gathering public knowledge. They inspire us to raise our expectations for ourselves, guide our aspirations to model excellence in our community, and invigorate our hopes for making a positive difference in the world. I've been working with different agencies on a variety of plans, and some of the strategic priorities that we identified are the following. So the first is priority is connected communities, and that is recognition that libraries span the digital divide as well as connect people to resources and each other, weaving a resilient social fabric. The second is invest in people. That's develop our full potential of our team and community by recruiting, retaining, and rewarding our staff. We hold ourselves accountable for upholding and applying the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. We allocate resources to workforce development and professional development, and we champion an organization-wide culture of leadership, risk-taking, and accountability. And a third example is spark curiosity. This is where we talk about how libraries are a place where people can geek out and pursue their passions and dive deep into a world of information. It's where we can find people of all ages eager to learn new things and explore the world from the comfort of our community. So your strategic priorities will be specific to what you heard and define what you're working toward to meet the needs that were identified. Once you've established your strategic priorities, it's time to figure out how you're going to make that happen. And here's where we get into some details about what the library will be working on in the next 3 years. And it's part of the plan that identifies who's responsible for making the different parts of it happen. And I just want to be really clear here. No one person should be responsible for implementing the entire plan, although ultimate accountability rests with the director and the board of trustees. But if you have staff, you may assign some activities to them to ensure that the different objectives are met. Please remember that the goals, objectives, and outcomes should support your identified strategic priorities, as well as reflecting your mission, vision, and value statements. So as you are establishing the goals for your library, keep a couple things in mind, including identifying the project leader, and this is the person who's going to be responsible for making sure everything outlined in the plan is achieved. So who's the point person for each goal? In many cases, it might be the director, but you don't want to take on too much, and this is an excellent opportunity to provide leadership experience for other staff members. That being said, be really clear about the expectations for project leaders. When and how should they report on their progress? And what format do you want for those reports? The objectives for each goal is where you get specific about what's going to happen. Your objectives are detailed statements of the direction you're moving in and why it's important to your organization. These are really clear goals you intend to achieve within the plan's time frame, and this includes identifying the target group being served by each goal and describing how each target group will benefit from that specific goal. Then come the action step and activities, which clearly outline what's going to happen, what implementation looks like, and what everybody can expect. You also want to be sure to establish a clear timeline to implement the action and achieve the goals. When can people expect things to take place? How long will it take to make this happen? What will it look like, and in what sequence are things happening? You also want to build in some measurement and evaluation, which is how we measure how successful we're being. This is something you establish to identify what success looks like to your organization. So let's take, for example, one of your strategic directions is to invest in people. In that case, you could specify how many staff members or percentage of staff members would take part in professional development opportunities in any given year. Or if equity, diversity, and inclusion is a priority, what initiatives are going to demonstrate your success? And remember, as you're setting these measurements, that this is what the board will use to evaluate the director, and the director will use to evaluate staff. So we want to be really realistic about what we need to achieve success. I think I told you in an earlier session that the first plan I wrote was incredibly ambitious. I think I had something like 8 to 10 priorities, which is, of course, not at all realistic. To add to that problem, I was the only full-time employee and I had 6 part-time people at the time. So I don't want to discourage you. Like, having big dreams and bold visions is fabulous, and I want to encourage that. But when it comes time to make the plan, we need to figure out what is it that we can realistically achieve in all that we've set out to do, and getting really specific about identifying what it is that we need to succeed. And so that requires thinking about how we align our budget to achieve our goals and benefit the community. And it's a great time um, to do some deep thinking about what you need to ask for to get to where you want to go. And it's a good time to make a case for additional resources if you need them, when you can tie your ask back to what the community um, wanted. So, for example, we heard that our community wants to ensure that everybody can flourish, which requires easy access to the internet. So we're going to partner with our municipality to provide free Wi-Fi access at all the public parks, but to do so, we need to increase our budget by $10,000. So now you know when you're going out for your budget referendum, you're asking for that increase, but you're tying it very specifically to what you heard from the community and what people specifically asked for, which should help you to be very successful. And finally, the plan should include clear guidance on how you will measure success. This is the evaluation piece that the board will use to evaluate the director, and the director uses to evaluate their team. Once you share your community-based plan on the website, your community will also be able to see what you've identified as your goals and can hold you accountable to doing what you said you would do. You want to take some time with this piece and create goals that require a bit of a stretch but are grounded in reality. The evaluation tools you put in place are for internal analysis to assess how well you're making progress toward the strategic priorities you've identified. Your director's report to the board should include progress updates, any obstacles that have come up, or if you need to recalibrate something. If you decide to assign specific staff to be responsible for a project or activity that's part of the plan, you want to check in with them to see what progress is being made and include that in your report to the board. You also want to be sure to review the plan at least 1 or 2 times a year during a board meeting, when you can come together with your trustees and reflect on how the plan is progressing. And remember, again, it's a living document, so you may need to make some periodic adjustments. If you do, just be sure that your board approves them. And as you're discussing the process, you can consider things like how much progress are we making towards our vision? Are our strategic priorities still relevant? What objectives are we completing? Are there any objectives that are no longer needed? Do we have sufficient projects and activities to deliver our objectives? How are we measuring our progress? Do our measurements still make sense? Do we need to revisit any of our priorities? Are we unable to meet some of the goals we've set? And if so, why is that? We also want to make some time to think about, when we are managing to meet our goals and priorities, what helped us succeed? What can we do to replicate this success moving forward in other things that we take on? And finally, how have our identified goals brought us closer to achieving our mission and vision statements? If during a review you find yourself struggling or falling short of a goal, please just take a deep breath. Things happen, and as we've learned in the past couple of years, many unexpected things can derail the best laid plans. Once you've had a chance to breathe, think about what is explicitly stopping you from achieving your goals. Is it a lack of resources? Was it a misunderstanding of what the goal was? Did the measurement put in place not match the objective? Once you identify where the problem lies, determine how you're going to address and correct that problem and continue to move forward. If there's one thing you take away from this series, I hope it's the idea that a community-based plan is a roadmap for your library's future. It's not a one and done exercise where you write the plan, put it on the shelf, have a party, and then do the same thing a couple of years from now. It's a living, breathing document that should inform everything that happens in your library. You've made time to identify the shared values you hold. You have a vision for the future and a mission that explicitly details how what you do benefits the community. As you're planning programs, hiring people, writing policies, or deciding on new services, you want to think about how all of that ties into the plan you've created and helps you achieve the objectives you've established. Again, if something goes wrong, don't worry about it. Recalibrate, reconsider, and adjust. And be sure to communicate clearly to everyone, and that includes your board of trustees, your library team, and your community, why you're doing so that everybody stays on the same page. So thanks to all of you who have stuck with me through this series. I hope it was helpful. And as I mentioned before, once you begin this process, if you get stuck or want to talk something through or just need general help, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love strategic planning and I'm always happy to geek out about it. So thank you again for your time and attention. May your planning go smoothly and your resources be plentiful.